I want you to try something for me, just for a second. Uh, Pause whatever you're doing and tap on the table in front of you. Or if you're driving, just squeeze the steering wheel. Or even just grab your own arm. It feels solid, right? You feel like this totally self-contained unit. You are here, the rest of the world is out there, and your thoughts are locked safely inside your skull, just waiting for you to decide to speak them.
Yeah, that's pretty much the standard operating procedure for how we experience being human.
Right.
And honestly, it's a very comforting illusion. I mean, it keeps us sane.
But that is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
An illusion. Because if we strip away that psychological safety blanket and look at the raw biophysics, we really aren't solid at all. We're porous.
Porous is the perfect word for it. We like to think of ourselves as islands or maybe statues, but physically speaking, we are way more like nets. We're just these fragments of matter and water that are held together by massive energy fields.
Which is wild.
It is, and today we're looking at research that suggests those energy fields don't actually stop at your skin. They interact with the entire planet.
This is the exact kind of stuff that keeps me up at night in the best way possible.
Yes.
So we're doing a deep dive today into a really fascinating paper coming out of the Polytechnic University of Turin in Italy.
Yeah.
It's led by an anesthesiologist named Marco Cavaglia and a neuroscientist, Tommaso Firo. And they are proposing something that sounds like it belongs in a sci-fi novel. Or maybe like a Marvel movie. But they claim it is entirely grounded in hard math and biology.
It's a bold hypothesis, to say the least. They are basically mapping out how human biology, specifically the brain, synchronizes and resonates with the Earth's electromagnetic energy.
So the core mystery we are trying to crack in this deep dive is this. If our atoms are glued together by electromagnetic energy, how does that energy interact with the giant magnet we live on? And does that interaction actually explain the origin of consciousness?
It is the ultimate question. It bridges physics, biology, philosophy, and to even begin to answer it, we have to talk about the heartbeat of the Earth.
Right, which brings us to the Schumann resonances. Now, I have to be totally honest here. Whenever I hear phrases like Earth frequencies, my alarm bells immediately go off.
Sure, yeah.
I start thinking about crystal shops and mood rings and, that kind of thing. But this is a real, measurable, physical phenomenon.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't mystical at all. It's atmospheric physics.
Yeah.
It was actually predicted mathematically way back in the 1950s. If you imagine the Earth as a ball, and the ionosphere, which is that layer of the upper atmosphere charged by the sun, is a shell around it.
Right.
That space in between acts like a giant resonant cavity.
Like the body of a guitar, but global.
Exactly like that. And lightning strikes are happening constantly around the globe. We're talking about 50 times every single second.
Wow.
Yeah. And these strikes blow out electromagnetic pulses. Those pulses bounce around in that cavity, reflecting back and forth, and they create a standing wave.
And that wave has a very specific frequency.
It does. It oscillates at approximately 7.83 hertz. That is the fundamental frequency of the planet's electromagnetic field.
7.83 hertz. That is incredibly low. You can't hear that.
No, you can't hear it. But life on Earth evolved inside this field. It has been there for billions of years. It is quite literally the background noise of our evolution.
Right.
So Cavaglia and Firo's argument is that because we evolved in this soup, our biological systems are basically tuned to it. The electromagnetism in our own bodies overlaps with, and possibly resonates with, this planetary heartbeat.
So we are literally vibrating in tune with the rock we live on. Which sounds super poetic, but they mean it literally.
That is the hypothesis. And this is where they really flip the script on a very common phrase you hear all the time, going with the flow.
Right, because usually going with the flow means, I'm taking a nap, or I'm not going to stress about that deadline at work.
Exactly. We use it as a metaphor for passivity, just chilling out.
Yeah.
But these researchers argue that in a biophysical context, flow is a strict requirement for life. Living systems are not statues. As Tommaso Firo puts it, we are ongoing processes.
Ongoing processes.
Yeah, we are continuous electrical activity, chemical exchange, fluid movement.
Meaning if the flow stops, you're not relaxed, you're dead.
Precisely. The brain isn't a fixed machine executing code like a laptop. A laptop can sit turned off on a desk and it's still a laptop. A brain can't do that. It is a dynamic system that is constantly seeking stability while simultaneously adapting to signals from the environment. It's like trying to find your footing on a moving ship.
Okay, so if we are these dynamic flowing systems, what are we flowing in? we need to talk about the wet computer concept from the paper. Because I know I am mostly water, and my brain is what, like 75%?
About that, yes. But here is the key insight from the research. It's not just tap water sloshing around inside your skull. If it were just bulk water, it wouldn't be able to do what it does.
They mentioned a few specific types of water. There's the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF, which is basically the cushion.
Right, that's the shock absorber, the hydration layer. But the real game changer is something called vicinal or exclusion zone water.
Exclusion zone water. That sounds like a restricted area at an airport or some kind of Chernobyl reference.
It does sound intimidating, but it's actually much friendlier than that and way more vital. This is a concept championed by researchers like Gerald Pollack. It refers to a highly ordered layer of water molecules that forms right next to hydrophilic surfaces.
Like the membranes of our cells.
Exactly. In this zone, the water isn't chaotic. It actually lines up in a hexagonal structure.
So it creates this structured shell around the cell, like a protective gel almost.
Sort of, but crucially, it is electrically active. Because of how it's structured, it actually separates charge. It pushes out protons. So what you end up with is a negative charge right next to the membrane and a positive charge further out.
Wait, positive on one side, negative on the other. You're describing a battery.
Bingo. Exclusion zone water effectively turns your cellular environment into a battery. It stores and transmits energy. It makes the wet computer conductive and highly responsive to even very weak electromagnetic signals. It effectively prepares the brain to receive data.
So that explains the soup we're made of, the battery. But a battery is completely useless without a device to power. And this is where the paper gets really granular. Literally, they focus heavily on the container itself, the cell membrane.
This is honestly my favorite part of their argument because it challenges how we typically teach biology. Usually when we study neurons, we obsess over the proteins, the ion channels, the receptors.
Right, the machines that open and close.
Yeah, the moving parts.
Yeah.
And we treat the lipid membrane as just the plastic bag holding all those machines together.
Just a generic wall.
Exactly. But Cavaglia points out that in real living cells, the arrangement of those lipids, the fats, is incredibly complex and specific. It is not just a bag, it's the circuit board. Actually, it's even more than a circuit board.
They used an analogy in the source material about a violin that I thought was just brilliant. It really helped me visualize this whole thing.
It is a great comparison. Cavaglia says the membrane is not just a container, it's more like the material of the instrument itself. Imagine you have two violins. One is made of cheap factory plywood. The other is a Stradivarius made of aged spruce. You pluck the string on both, that's the energy input. The note is exactly the same, say a middle C.
But the sound you hear is completely different.
Completely. The resonance, the warmth, the sustain, it all depends on the physical material of the body. The wood determines how the energy propagates and sustains itself in the air.
So in the human brain, the wood is the lipid membrane.
Yes. And your brain isn't made of just one type of wood. The research shows that the lipid composition actually changes depending on where you are in the neuron. Your dendrites, your cell body, your axon, they all have totally different recipes of fats to fine-tune their electrical properties.
So my dendrites might be maple and my axon might be spruce.
In a biophysical sense, yes. They are tuned differently to handle different signals. They facilitate or inhibit the flow of energy based on their physical structure. This is called local tuning. It means the brain isn't just processing signals, the actual physical material of the brain is shaping those signals as they move through it.
Okay, I'm totally with you. We have the battery, which is the exclusion zone water, and we have the instrument, the lipid membrane. Now we need to understand how they actually make music together, which brings us to the core theoretical model they are proposing, the EMI framework.
Right. EMI stands for Energy, Mass, and Information. It describes a continuous flowing cycle. Energy flows through matter, that's the mass, the lipids, the structured water. The structure of that matter, the violin wood, determines what patterns are possible. And those patterns, that is what they call information.
I need to pause on information for a second because usually, when I think of information, I think of a file on my computer or a trivia fact like the capital of France is Paris or just a sequence of ones and zeros. But they are using a very specific physics definition here.
Yes, and this distinction is crucial. In this context, information isn't data stored on a hard drive. It is defined as the structure and constraints that determine what a system can do next. It is the architecture of possibility.
The architecture of possibility. That is deep. So the physical structure of my brain sells the specific fats. The water literally dictates what thoughts I am physically capable of having.
In a sense, yes. Furrow explains that the brain isn't just energy moving through tissue, it's energy moving through a system that has learned to settle into stable patterns. In dynamic systems theory, which is the math they're using here, these stable patterns are called attractors.
I've heard of attractors. I always visualize a landscape with hills and valleys.
That is the classic image. Imagine a really bumpy landscape. If you roll a ball into that landscape, it isn't going to stop on the peak of a hill. Gravity is going to pull it down into a valley. That valley is the attractor. It's a state the system naturally wants to fall into.
So in the brain, a thought or a perception is just the ball settling into one of these physical valleys.
Exactly. And the landscape itself is physical. The molecular organization of those membranes we talked about creates those valleys. It creates the path of least resistance.
Right.
So information emerges when neuronal activity finds these stable, reproducible patterns. That stability is what guides your perception, your actions, and ultimately the continuity of you.
The continuity of self. That is a really heavy concept. So myself, my personality, my memories, my quirks is basically just a series of balls rolling into the same valleys over and over again.
That is the EMI perspective in a nutshell. You are a collection of stable energy patterns. But, and this brings us right back to the start of our deep dive, the system isn't closed off. It is porous. The landscape isn't just shaped by your internal biology. It is actively being shaken by external fields.
Right, the antenna concept. We're tuning in to the Schumann resonance.
Scientists explain that our interaction with these energy fields works a lot like an antenna. Most energy waves, like radio, Wi-Fi, cosmic rays, they're completely invisible to us. We can't see them, but they pass right through us. Think of a radio sitting in an empty room.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You don't see any sound waves floating in the air, but if you turn the radio on, music fills the room. The musicians aren't inside the plastic box. The radio is picking up signals from far away. And crucially, the sound you hear depends entirely on the frequency it is tuned to.
I really love the radio analogy because it explains the difference between noise and connection so well. The source material makes a fascinating point about what happens when you have multiple radios in the same space.
Right. If you have 10 radios in a room and they are all tuned to different stations, one is playing jazz, one is playing the news, one is just playing static, the sound waves clash in the air, they actually partially cancel each other out, you get cacophony, total dissonance.
Which is basically my exact experience in a crowded coffee shop on a Monday morning, just pure noise.
Exactly. But if you tune all 10 of those radios to the exact same frequency, the signal is amplified. A single song fills the room, louder and clearer than any single radio could ever produce on its own. That is resonance. And humans, according to this theory, work the exact same way.
So when we talk about vibing with someone or being on the same wavelength, that is not just poetry anymore.
According to this research, no, it's physics. If the energy waves of two people match in amplitude and frequency, they align. They rise and fall together. That amplifies the signal between them. That is literal resonance.
And the opposite of that is dissonance.
Yes. If the waves differ, they cancel out, like static interfering with a song. Cavaglia points out that this perfectly explains why you might instantly dislike someone at first sight. You haven't spoken a word to them, you have no idea what their politics are, but you just recoil. It's not their shoes or their haircut, it's a clash of energy fields. You're physically dissonant with them.
That is wild. It really reframes everyday social interaction. It makes trust your gut sound a lot more like trust your antenna.
It does. And it leads perfectly into this broader idea of collective resonance. We see this all the time at concerts, sporting events, even funerals.
Oh, absolutely. You walk into a stadium for a big game or a massive concert, and suddenly you feel like you're part of this single massive organism. I always just assumed that was purely psychological. Like, we're all looking at the same stage, so we feel connected.
It is psychological, but Furrow argues it is also rhythmic and physiological. Think about it. Everyone in that room is exposed to the exact same structured stimuli.
Yeah.
The same beat of the music, the same chanting, the same synchronized movements.
So our hearts literally start beating together.
Potentially, yes. These shared external rhythms influence breathing, heart rates, and neural oscillations. From the EMI perspective, this creates a shared attractor state.
So we're all rolling into the same valley at the exact same time.
Exactly. The internal dynamics of thousands of individual people begin to align. There is actually a technique in neuroscience called hyperscanning, where they measure this in real time.
Hyperscanning. That sounds intense, like something from a futuristic sci-fi hospital.
It's fascinating stuff. They hook up multiple people to EEG machines or fMRI scanners simultaneously while they interact, rather than just scanning one person in total isolation like they normally do. They can literally see brain activity between individuals becoming synchronized during shared experiences. It's not just a vague feeling, it is a measurable temporal alignment of energy patterns.
That is incredible. It really makes me think about mob mentality, or the power of a really charismatic leader, or just the pure joy of being on a crowded dance floor. It's all physics. We are in training to each other.
It connects biology to sociology in a really elegant way. And this is but there is a major difference between a human being and a radio. And I think this is where the theory saves us from just being biological robots.
I was really hoping you'd say that, because otherwise I'd start to feel a bit like a kitchen appliance. What actually makes us different?
Well, the radio doesn't know it's playing Mozart. It doesn't understand its own existence. The transmission moving through it doesn't fundamentally change the radio structure. Humans are different because of what we do with that signal once we receive it.
This is the semantic story part of the paper.
Yes. Once a brain has developed memory, language, and self-monitoring capabilities, it doesn't just pass the signal through blindly, it constructs a story. It creates a coherent explanation of what is happening and who the self is that is experiencing it.
So the brain takes these stable energy patterns, these physical attractors, and basically writes a biography on top of them.
Precisely. Farrow says the brain is a system constantly interacting with rhythms, both internal and external. The outcome your conscious experience depends on whether the system settles into stable, coherent patterns or unstable, noisy ones. But the meaning of that pattern, that is something your brain constructs after the fact.
It's like the brain is the narrator, constantly trying to make sense of the raw energy flow. Like, oh, I feel this strong resonance, therefore I must be in love. Or I feel this intense dissonance, therefore I am angry.
Exactly. The feeling comes first. The physics comes first. The story follows.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a minute.
Yeah.
Because whenever we start talking about energy fields and vibrations and consciousness, there is a very strong tendency for the scientific community to roll their eyes and yell pseudoscience. It gets very close to that quantum mysticism territory where people use physics words to justify magic.
And that is a totally fair reaction to a lot of the stuff out there on the internet. You have to be really careful. But Cavaglia and Firo are very clear about this in their work. They emphasize that they aren't proposing some new mystical theory. They are building a bridge between already established findings in membrane biophysics, neuroscience, and electromagnetism.
And they say their model is testable, right? Which is really the gold standard for this kind of thing.
It is testable. If their model is correct, you should be able to make small, deliberate changes to the lipid recipe of a cell membrane, and that should predictably alter how the brain settles into those attractor patterns.
Just like changing the wood of the violin predictably changes the sound.
Exactly. It moves the physical valleys in the landscape.
Yeah.
And if you move the valleys, you change the thought. You change the perception itself. These default patterns are the attractors that fundamentally shape how we feel and respond to the world around us.
So going with the flow isn't about being lazy or passive. It's about tuning the instrument.
Cavaglia puts it beautifully. He says we are merely biological interfaces that decode a signal that is out there in the universe. Going with the flow means allowing the brain-body system to synchronize and stabilize.
So that the experience of life is clearer, less distorted by internal static and noise.
Yes, if you are constantly fighting the resonance, if your internal radio is just full of static, you can't hear the music, you can't process the information clearly. Synchronization is really about efficiency and clarity.
This has really shifted my perspective on, well, pretty much everything. Being a biological interface sounds a lot cooler than being a meat sack.
It certainly gives you a bit more agency, doesn't it? Or maybe less, depending on how you look at the physics of it.
So what does this all mean for us, practically speaking? Should I be packing up and moving to a different latitude to catch better Schumann waves?
I don't think you need to call them movers just yet, but it does mean we need to pay serious attention to our environment and our internal state. If we are porous, if we are truly affected by these invisible fields, then the physical environments we put ourselves in matter, the people we surround ourselves with matter. We are constantly tuning and being tuned.
They're constantly seeking that resonance.
And avoiding the dissonance. It suggests that health, both mental and physical, is really about maintaining a coherent, stable energy state in a very chaotic world. It's about keeping your instrument finely tuned so you can play the music clearly.
That is Incredibly powerful takeaway.
Okay.
We have covered a lot of ground today, from the heartbeat of the Earth at 7.83 hertz to the microscopic lipid layers of our neurons, and finally to the stories we tell ourselves about who we are.
It's a fascinating convergence of physics and biology. It forces us to look at the human experience as something much bigger than just what happens inside our own heads.
It really does. And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to chew on as you go about the rest of your day. We talk about how the brain constructs a semantic story, a narrative of the self, after it stabilizes these energy patterns from the environment.
Right.
So here is the question. If our self is just a story the brain tells after decoding signals from the universe, are we actually the authors of our own thoughts? Or are we just the radio, convincing itself that it wrote the song it's playing? Think about that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.